Did you know the word masterpiece wasn't originally about a work of genius? It was a test, a final exam. It was the physical object a journeyman craftsman had to present to the guild masters to prove he was worthy of joining their ranks. It was his ticket to a career, a community, and a life. The guilds of the Middle Ages were not just unions or trade associations. They were complete systems for life and work. They controlled quality, set prices, educated the young, and cared for the old. They were secretive, powerful, and woven into the very fabric of society. But we dismantled them. The Industrial Revolution prized speed over skill. The modern corporation valued scale over community. We traded the workshop for the factory, the master for the manager, and the masterpiece for the performance review. We gained efficiency.
We gain scale.
But what do we lose? We think we are more advanced, more connected, more productive. But are we? Are we happier in our work? Do we feel a sense of belonging? Do we believe we are building something that will last? The guildsmen of 14th century Florence or 15th century London might look at our gig economy, our endless meetings, and our disposable products and wonder if we've forgotten something essential. They had wisdom. Not perfect wisdom, because their world was often brutal, exclusive, and unfair. But it was a practical wisdom forged in fire and stone and wool that addressed the fundamental human need to do good work and belong to something bigger than oneself. It's a wisdom that whispers to us from the past, asking questions we become too busy to answer. Number 16, what does it mean to be a true master? We use the word master lightly today. We talk about mastering a new software, taking a master class, or becoming a master of our domain. It implies a high level of skill, but it feels temporary, like a badge you unlock in a game before moving to the next level. For a medieval guildsman, mastery was not a level. It was a destination. It was the culmination of a life's work, a status that came with profound responsibilities not just to the craft, but to the community. To become a master, a craftsman didn't just need to be good, he had to be exceptional. This was proven by the creation of a masterpiece, a concept we'll explore later. But beyond that single work, he had to demonstrate a deep, almost intuitive understanding of his materials and tools. The master stonemason didn't just know how to cut stone, he knew the stone. He could read its grain, anticipate its weaknesses, and understand how it would behave under the immense pressures of a cathedral wall for the next 500 years. The master weaver knew the character of different wools, how they would take a dye, and how the humidity in the air would affect the tension on his loom. This was knowledge that couldn't be fully written down. It was embodied. This idea of deep, embodied skill is something modern psychology is just beginning to reappreciate. While the 10,000-hour rule, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell from the work of Anders Ericsson, suggests that expertise is a function of deliberate practice, guild mastery went further. It wasn't just about the hours you put in, it was about who you became during those hours. A master was expected to be of good character. He had to be financially stable enough to open his own shop, purchase raw materials, and take on apprentices. He had to be a teacher, responsible for passing on the mysteries of the craft to the next generation, and he had to be a civic leader, participating in the governance of the guild, and often the town itself. The masters of the great guilds, like the Arte della Lana Wool Guild in Florence, were effectively the city's ruling class for a time. Their definition of mastery was holistic. It combined skill, financial responsibility, pedagogical duty, and civic engagement. Compare this to our modern concept of an expert. An expert is often a specialist, a person with deep knowledge in a narrow field. They might be a brilliant coder, but a terrible manager. They might be a genius strategist, but financially irresponsible. We have siloed the different aspects of a person's life. The guild system saw them as integrated. You couldn't be a true master of your craft if you weren't also a master of your life and a responsible member of your community. The journey to mastery was long and arduous. A typical apprenticeship started around age 12 and lasted 7 to 10 years. This was followed by several years as a journeyman, traveling and working for different masters. Only then, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, could a man even attempt to become a master. This long timeline fostered a kind of patience and deep learning that is almost alien to our world of 2-week boot camps and certifications earned over a weekend. As the sociologist Richard Sennett writes in his book, The Craftsman, this slow, deep engagement with a difficult problem is where true understanding develops. The struggle is the point. The guildmaster's authority was not just granted, it was earned in the most visible way possible. His skills were on display in the products he sold. His ability as a teacher was evident in the quality of his journeymen. His financial acumen was proven by the continued existence of his shop. His reputation was his most valuable asset. In a world without Yelp reviews or LinkedIn endorsements, your name and the quality of your work were everything. This created a powerful incentive for integrity. A master who cheated a customer or produced shoddy goods wasn't just risking a bad review, he was risking his entire livelihood and social standing. The guild would intervene, and punishments could be severe, from fines to expulsion. We've lost this integrated view of mastery. We've replaced it with a collection of certificates and job titles. We seek experts who can solve a specific problem for us, but we rarely ask about their character or their commitment to the future of their field. The guild's wisdom suggests that true mastery isn't just about what you know or what you can do. It's about who you are, what you pass on, and the responsibility you take for the health of your craft and your community. What if becoming a CEO required you to first prove you could do the most basic job in the company flawlessly? If the only way to be considered a senior engineer was to have successfully trained 3 junior engineers to the point where they could replace you? What happens to a society when its most skilled people have no obligation to teach? And what do we still not understand about the psychological effects of a world without true recognized masters? Number 15, why don't we celebrate our work anymore? Think about the last time your workplace celebrated something. It was probably a holiday party, a retirement, or maybe hitting a quarterly target. The celebration was likely about the company or an occasion, but was it about the work itself? Did you celebrate the act of creation, the beauty of a well-crafted line of code, the elegance of a solved problem, the satisfaction of a perfectly mitered corner? Probably not. Our relationship with work is largely transactional. The celebration is the paycheck. Medieval guilds saw things differently. Work was not just a means to an end, it was a central part of one's social and spiritual identity. And this identity was constantly reinforced through ritual and celebration. Every guild had a patron saint. The shoemakers had Saint Crispin, the carpenters had Saint Joseph, the weavers had Saint Stephen. On the saint's feast day, the entire guild would stop work. They would attend a special mass, clad in their guild's official livery, a uniform that announced their collective identity to the world. They would march in processions through the town, carrying banners and symbols of their craft. These events were not just religious observances, they were profound acts of community building. As described by historians like Barbara Hannawalt in Growing Up in Medieval London, these processions and feasts were a way for the guild to display its wealth, its numbers, and its importance to the civic life of the town. They were a form of marketing, but also a source of immense collective pride. After the formal ceremonies, there would be a great feast in the guild hall, a building that was often one of the most impressive in the town, second only to the cathedral. There would be food, drink, and entertainment, oaths would be sworn, new members inducted, and grievances aired. These rituals gave meaning to the daily grind. A stonemason chipping away at a block of granite wasn't just a laborer, he was a member of the Honorable Company of Masons, a brother in a lineage that stretched back generations, working under the watchful eye of his patron saint to build something magnificent for God and man. The rituals reminded him that his small, repetitive task was part of a much larger, sacred enterprise. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim called this collective effervescence, the feeling of excitement and unity that people get when they come together and participate in a shared ritual. It's a powerful social glue, and the guilds used it expertly. They also had rituals to mark the stages of a craftsman's life. The beginning of an apprenticeship was a formal, contractual affair, often recorded by a town clerk. The completion of an apprenticeship and the start of the journeyman years was a moment of liberation and new beginnings. And the acceptance of a new master into the guild was the highest honor, a ceremony filled with oaths and symbolic gestures. These rites of passage gave structure and significance to a career. They made the long years of hard work feel like a meaningful progression, not just a series of random jobs. What do we have now? The onboarding process, the exit interview, the annual performance review. These are bureaucratic procedures, not meaningful rituals. They are designed for efficiency and legal protection, not to foster a sense of belonging or sacred duty. The occasional pizza party or Employee of the Month award feels like a hollow echo of the guild's deep, integrated social life. We have tried to replace genuine community with corporate culture, but it's a poor substitute. The loss of these rituals is part of a broader disenchantment of the world, a term used by the sociologist Max Weber to describe the shift from a world understood through myth and religion to one understood through science and rationality. In this process, we gained technical proficiency but lost a sense of meaning. The work itself became disconnected from any larger spiritual or social purpose. The guilds show us that work does not have to be this way. It can be a source of identity, community, and even sacred meaning, but only if we intentionally build the rituals and celebrations that support it. If we had to choose a patron saint for software developers or marketing consultants, who would it be and why? What would a modern-day guild procession look like marching through the streets of Silicon Valley or Wall Street? Is it possible to create meaningful secular rituals for our work, or is the magic gone for good? What don't we know about the link between the decline of workplace ritual and the rise of burnout and employee disengagement? Number 14, could we govern ourselves without the government? We live in a world of top-down regulation. The government sets the minimum wage, the safety standards, the environmental rules. A complex web of local, state, and federal agencies tells companies what they can and cannot do. We see this as normal, even necessary, to protect workers and consumers from the excesses of the free market. But for centuries, the primary regulators of a city's economy were the guilds themselves. They were a remarkable experiment in self-governance. A guild was, at its core, a collection of masters in a single trade who created and enforced their own rules. These rules, often recorded in detailed statutes, covered almost every aspect of their work. They set the standards for quality. A loaf of bread had to be a certain weight. A piece of cloth had to have a specific thread count. A guild inspector, a master chosen from their own ranks, had the authority to enter any workshop, inspect the goods, and confiscate or destroy anything that was substandard. The guild's reputation depended on it. This system of peer review quality control was incredibly effective. When you bought a piece of silver marked with the London Goldsmiths Guild leopard's head, you knew you were getting a product of verified purity. They also regulated prices. The guild would often set a just price for goods, a price that was deemed fair to both the producer and the consumer. This was intended to prevent ruinous price wars between members and to protect the public from price gouging. This directly contradicts the modern economic belief in the efficiency of free market competition. The guilds believed that a stable, predictable market was better for everyone than a chaotic one with winners and losers. Furthermore, they controlled the labor market. The guild decided who could practice the trade, how many apprentices a master could take on, and what a journeyman's wages should be. This was their most controversial function. On one hand, it ensured that there was a steady supply of well-trained craftsmen and prevented the market from being flooded with cheap, unskilled labor. On the other hand, it was a classic monopoly. It made it very difficult for outsiders to break in, stifled innovation, and sometimes kept prices artificially high. The economist Adam Smith famously railed against them in The Wealth of Nations in 1776, calling them a conspiracy against the public. But to see them only as monopolies is to miss the point. They were also providing the services we now expect from government. They enforced contracts between masters and apprentices. They mediated disputes between members. They acted as a collective bargaining unit in negotiations with the city government or local lords. In many ways, the guild hall was a private courthouse, legislature, and administrative office all in one. This system of self-regulation was possible because of the small-scale and high-trust environment of the medieval city. Your regulator wasn't a faceless bureaucrat in a distant capital. He was your neighbor, a fellow craftsman you saw at church and drank with at the tavern. The social pressure and the desire to maintain one's reputation were powerful enforcement mechanisms. As cities grew and economies became more complex and global, this system began to break down. The rise of nation-states with powerful central governments eroded the guild's authority. The Industrial Revolution, with its new technologies and factory-based production, made the guild model of small workshops obsolete. The state took over the functions of regulation, and the guild's power faded. Today, we are left with a system where regulation is almost exclusively the domain of the government. Professional associations, like the American Medical Association or the Bar Association, retain some guild-like powers of certification and discipline, but they are exceptions. The guild's experiment in self-governance raises a fascinating question for our own time. In an age of globalization and massive corporations, could we ever return to a more localized, peer-regulated system? The open-source software movement, where communities of developers collaboratively create and maintain standards for their own projects, shows some guild-like characteristics. Could this model be applied to other industries? The guilds remind us that the choice isn't just between an unregulated free-for-all and top-down government control. There is a third way, a community governing itself. What if every industry, from coffee shops to software companies, was primarily regulated by an association of its own best practitioners? Who would benefit and who would lose? Could a system of peer inspection ever work in a globalized economy where your competitor is on the other side of the world? At what point does self-regulation become a self-serving monopoly? And what is the unknown social cost of replacing community-based trust with bureaucratic rules? Number 13, have we forgotten how to make things with our hands? Spend a moment thinking about the physical objects around you, your phone, your coffee mug, your chair. Do you know how they were made? Do you know what materials they are made from, where those materials came from, or what skills were required to transform them into the finished product? For most of us, the answer is no. We live in a world of black boxes. Our physical environment is a miracle of manufacturing, but the processes behind it are almost completely invisible to us. We have become profoundly disconnected from the world of making. This would have been unthinkable to a person in the Middle Ages. Their world was tangible and transparent, like a wooden table was clearly made from a tree by a carpenter with saws, planes, and chisels. A woolen cloak was made from the fleece of a sheep, spun into thread by spinsters, and woven into cloth by a weaver on a loom. The entire chain of production was local and visible. Most people had a basic competence in making and mending the things they needed for daily life. And for the things they couldn't make themselves, they went to a guild craftsman, a person whose life was dedicated to the mastery of a single material. The core of guild life was this intimate, hands-on relationship with the physical world. An apprentice didn't learn his trade by reading a book or watching a video. He learned it through his hands, his eyes, and his body. He swept the floor, sharpened the tools, and prepared the raw materials for years before he was ever allowed to work on the finished product. This slow, repetitive, physical labor built what psychologists call tacit knowledge, a deep, intuitive understanding that cannot be easily articulated. A master potter doesn't measure the moisture content of his clay with a sensor, he feels it in his hands. A master blacksmith doesn't use a thermometer to judge the temperature of the steel. He sees it in the color of the glow. This kind of knowledge, as detailed by philosopher Michael Polanyi, is a form of inwelling. The craftsman's mind extends into his tools and materials. The hammer becomes an extension of his arm. The wood speaks to him through the blade of his plane. This deep connection between hand and mind is something we are in danger of losing. Most modern jobs, even in manufacturing, involve interacting with a screen. The factory worker monitors a robot. The designer manipulates a 3D model on a computer. We are increasingly a society of symbol manipulators, not material transformers. The writer and mechanic Matthew B. Crawford argues in his book, Shop Class as Soulcraft, that this shift has profound consequences. He suggests that working with our hands provides a unique form of satisfaction and a powerful connection to reality. The physical world gives you honest feedback. A piece of wood will either fit or it won't. A circuit will either work or it won't. There is no room for the ambiguity and subjectivity that dominates so much of office work. This honest feedback loop is essential for developing a sense of competence and agency. When we make and repair our own things, we feel more in control of our lives and less dependent on faceless corporations. The modern craft movement, from artisanal bread to handmade furniture, is a reaction to this sense of disconnection. People are rediscovering the joy of making things with their hands, but it remains a niche interest, a hobby for those with the time and money. The guild system placed the maker at the very center of the economy and society. The most respected and powerful people in town were not bankers or consultants. They were the masters who could transform raw materials into things of beauty, utility, and durability. Their wisdom challenges us to look at the objects around us not as disposable commodities, but as the products of skill, knowledge, and a deep physical engagement with the world. What would happen to our economy and our environment if every person was required to know how to repair the 10 most common items in their home? Is the maker movement a temporary fad or the beginning of a real shift back to valuing physical skill? What critical problem-solving abilities do we lose when we no longer understand how the physical world works? And what are the hidden psychological consequences of living a life mediated almost entirely through screens? Number 12, when did good enough replace the best? We are obsessed with speed and efficiency. We want our food fast, our deliveries overnight, and our internet connections instant. In the world of business, we celebrate the minimum viable product, the strategy of releasing a product that is just barely functional and then fixing it later. We have accepted a culture where good enough is the standard because perfect is too slow and expensive. The medieval guild craftsman would have been horrified by this idea. For him, the goal was not speed or efficiency. The goal was excellence. The guild system was built around an uncompromising commitment to quality. This was not just a matter of professional pride, it was a structural necessity. In an era before mass production and branding, a craftsman's reputation was his single most important asset. A single shoddy piece of work could ruin a reputation that had taken a lifetime to build. The guild acted as the collective guarantor of this quality. The guild's mark on a product was a promise to the consumer that it met the highest standards of the craft. These standards were incredibly specific and rigorously enforced. The statutes of the Weavers' Guild in Arras, France, from the 14th century, specified the exact number of threads to be used, the quality of the wool, and the types of dyes that were permissible. The guild inspectors or searchers had the legal right to enter any member's workshop at any time to inspect both the tools and the finished goods. If a product was found to be substandard, it was often destroyed in a public ceremony, a powerful and humiliating deterrent. The offending craftsman would be fined, and repeated offenses could lead to expulsion from the guild, which was effectively the end of his career. This relentless focus on quality was driven by a different understanding of time. The guild craftsman was not thinking about next quarter's profits. He was thinking about his legacy. He was part of a chain of knowledge, receiving the secrets of the craft from the master before him, and obligated to pass them on to the apprentice after him. The cathedrals they built were designed to last for 1,000 years. The furniture, the tools, the cloth they made were intended to be used for a lifetime and then passed down to the next generation. This long-term perspective naturally leads to a focus on durability and quality. Why cut corners to save a few hours if the product you are making is intended to outlive you? Compare this to our modern culture of planned obsolescence. Our electronics are designed to be replaced every few years. Our clothes fall apart after a few seasons. Our furniture is made from particle board and plastic. We have traded durability for affordability and convenience. The economist E.F. Schumacher, in his 1973 book, Small is Beautiful, critiqued this mindset. He argued that an economy based on maximizing consumption and disposability was unsustainable and ultimately unsatisfying. He advocated for a return to what he called Buddhist economics, which values human well-being and durable goods over an endless cycle of production and consumption. The guild's commitment to excellence was not about a mystical artistic temperament. It was a practical, economic, and social strategy. They understood that quality builds trust. Trust builds reputation, and reputation builds a stable and prosperous life. They knew that doing a job right the first time, even if it took longer, was ultimately more efficient than constantly fixing mistakes or dealing with unhappy customers. They built things to last because they lived in a world where things had to last. We have built a world where it is more profitable if they don't. The forgotten wisdom of the guilds is that the pursuit of excellence is not a luxury. It is the foundation of a sustainable and meaningful way of work. What if products were legally required to have a durability label next to the price tag, indicating their expected lifespan? Could a modern business built on the principle of slow and perfect ever compete with one built on fast and good enough? Is our preference for convenience and low prices a rational choice or a cultural sickness we don't know how to cure? What is the unseen environmental and psychological cost of a world filled with things designed to fail? Number 11, are we building for next quarter or next century? Publicly traded companies report their earnings every 3 months. CEOs are judged on their ability to deliver short-term shareholder value. Political leaders operate on 2 or 4-year election cycles. Our entire system is structured around the short term. We are constantly searching for the quick win, the immediate result, the hack that will get us ahead right now. This short-term thinking is one of the most significant differences between our world and the world of the medieval guilds. They were built for the long haul. The most visible evidence of this long-term thinking is the great cathedrals of Europe. When the cornerstone of Chartres Cathedral was laid in 1194, nobody involved expected to see it completed. The master masons, who designed it, like the craftsmen who cut the stones and the donors who funded it all knew they were starting a project that would be finished by their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. They were building for a future they would never see. This required a profound sense of continuity, a belief that the institution they were part of, the church, the city, the guild flaw, would endure long after they were gone. This long-term perspective was woven into the very structure of the guilds. The apprenticeship system was a multi-generational transfer of knowledge. A master invested 7 to 10 years in an apprentice, not for a quick return, but to ensure the survival of the craft itself. The guild's assets, like the guild hall and the charitable funds, were managed with the expectation that they would serve members for centuries. Their regulations were designed to create a stable market, not to maximize immediate profits. They often restricted new technologies or production methods if they were seen as a threat to the long-term health of the craft or the employment of its members. From a modern perspective, this looks like Luddism and resistance to progress. From their perspective, it was responsible stewardship. This focus on the long term is a concept we are struggling to relearn today, especially in the face of challenges like climate change. The idea of cathedral thinking has been embraced by some in the environmental and technology fields. It refers to the ability to start projects that will not be completed in one's own lifetime. The Long Now Foundation, for example, is building a clock designed to run for 10,000 years, an explicit attempt to encourage a longer-term perspective. The writer Roman Schnarek, in his book The Good Ancestor, argues that we have a moral obligation to consider the impact of our actions on future generations, a concept he calls deep stewardship. The guilds were deep stewards of their craft. They saw themselves not as owners of their knowledge, but as temporary custodians. Their duty was to preserve it, refine it, and pass it on intact to the next generation. This stands in stark contrast to the modern corporate world, where proprietary knowledge is a jealously guarded asset and employees are often required to sign non-compete agreements to prevent them from taking their skills elsewhere. The guilds fostered a sense of collective ownership of the craft's mysteries. This long-term mindset also affected the way they viewed resources. In a world where materials were scarce and transportation was difficult, waste was a cardinal sin. And a carpenter would use every scrap of wood. A tailor would arrange his patterns to use every inch of cloth. This was not just about saving money, it was a sign of a good craftsman. The idea of a disposable economy would have been both morally and practically incomprehensible. They built things to last because they couldn't afford to be constantly replacing them. This forced frugality created a culture of durability and careful resource management that we have lost. The guilds were not perfect. Their long-term thinking could sometimes curdle into stagnation and an unwillingness to adapt. But their example forces us to confront the limitations of our own short-term obsession. They remind us that the most meaningful endeavors are often those that extend beyond our own lifespans. They ask us to consider whether we are being good ancestors and what kind of world we are building for the generations that will follow. If your company had to write a business plan for the next 100 years, what would it look like? What decisions would you make differently today if you were legally and financially responsible for the consequences of those decisions in 50 years? Can a society that is addicted to instant gratification ever learn to engage in cathedral thinking? And what do we not yet understand about how our perception of time shapes our values and our behavior? Number 10, what happens when your customer is your neighbor? Globalization has given us incredible choice and low prices. We can buy strawberries in winter, a shirt made in Bangladesh, and a phone designed in California and assembled in China. The person who made the product and the person who buys it are separated by thousands of miles, a dozen intermediaries, and a vast cultural gap. The transaction is anonymous and impersonal. The medieval guild economy was the exact opposite of this. It was radically local. For a guild craftsman, the customer was not an abstract data point in a sales report. The customer was his neighbor. It was the person he sat next to at church, the person whose children played with his children, the person he would see at the market every week for the rest of his life. This proximity changed everything. The relationship between producer and consumer was not a one-time transaction, it was a long-term social bond. This bond created a powerful, built-in mechanism for accountability. If a baker sold a stale loaf of bread, he couldn't hide behind a corporate customer service department. He would have to face the angry customer in person the next day. If a cobbler made a pair of shoes that fell apart in a week, his reputation would spread through the town's gossip network like wildfire. As the historian Sheila Ogilvy points out in her extensive research on European guilds, this reputational mechanism was often more powerful than any formal regulation. You didn't cheat your neighbors because you had to live with them. This local focus also meant that the craftsman was deeply embedded in his community. He was not just selling a product, he was providing a vital service to his fellow townspeople. His work was a visible and integral part of the local economy. This created a sense of purpose and belonging. The work had a clear and immediate social value. The blacksmith knew that the hinges he forged were for the new door on the weaver's house down the street. The potter knew that the bowls she threw would be used for the alderman's family dinner. The work was human-scaled and relational. Contrast this with the experience of a worker in a global supply chain. A person assembling smartphones in a massive factory may never see the finished product and will almost certainly never meet the person who uses it. The work is abstract and disconnected from its final purpose. This alienation is a concept Karl Marx wrote about extensively in the 19th century. He argued that industrial capitalism separates workers from the products of their labor, from their own creative essence, and from each other. The guild system, for all its faults, was a powerful antidote to this kind of alienation. The modern buy local movement is a conscious attempt to recreate some of the benefits of the guild economy. Farmers markets, craft breweries, and local artisan shops are all built on the idea that there is value in knowing the person who produces the things you consume. They seek to reestablish the personal accountable relationship between producer and consumer. However, these are often niche markets appealing to consumers who are willing and able to pay a premium. The guild system was not a niche, it was the entire economy. The local nature of the guild economy also fostered a deep understanding of local conditions and resources. Craftsmen used local timber, local clay, and local wool. They developed techniques and styles that were uniquely suited to their environment. This created a rich regional diversity of crafts, from the intricate lace of Brussels to the sturdy steel of Toledo. Globalization, with its standardized products and materials, has tended to erase this kind of local distinctiveness. Every high street in every city starts to look the same. The guilds remind us that a healthy economy can be rooted in a specific place, responsive to its needs, and reflective of its unique character. If you had to personally deliver every product you make or every email you send, how would the quality of your work change? Is it possible to build a sense of community and accountability in a global internet-based economy? What have we gained in choice and price that we have lost in trust and connection? And what are the unknown long-term social effects of a world where almost all of our economic relationships are with strangers? Number 9 is your name more valuable than your bank account. In our culture, success is often measured by wealth. We admire billionaires, follow the stock market, and equate a high salary with a successful career. We see money as the ultimate scorecard. For a medieval guildsman, there was a different currency that was often more valuable than gold or silver. That currency was his reputation. A craftsman's name and the reputation attached to it was his most important business asset. It was the foundation of his career, his social standing, and his family's future. In a small, close-knit community, without formal credit scores or online reviews, a good reputation was the key to everything. It determined whether customers would seek you out, whether suppliers would extend you credit for raw materials, and whether other masters would respect you. A man with a reputation for honesty, skill, and reliability would thrive. A man known for shoddy work, sharp practice, or a bad temper would find it almost impossible to make a living. This focus on reputation was not just an individual concern, it was a collective one. The reputation of the entire guild rested on the conduct of its individual members. If one weaver in Florence started selling substandard cloth, it could damage the reputation of all Florentine weavers in the lucrative export markets. This is why the guilds were so obsessed with quality control and enforcing codes of conduct. They were protecting their collective brand. The guild's mark was a certification of this collective reputation, a promise that the product was made by a craftsman in good standing. In building and maintaining a good reputation was a lifetime's work. It started in apprenticeship. An apprentice who was lazy or dishonest would find it difficult to become a journeyman. A journeyman who caused trouble or did poor work would struggle to find employment with other masters. The entire system was a long, slow process of character evaluation. By the time a man was ready to become a master, he had a track record that was known to everyone in his trade. This contrasts sharply with our modern, more anonymous economy. A person can move from city to city, from job to job, and to some extent reinvent themselves. A company can go bankrupt under one name and re-emerge under another, while online reputation platforms like Yelp, TripAdvisor, or Glassdoor are attempts to recreate this reputational accountability. They are often gameable and lack the depth of knowledge that comes from long-term, face-to-face relationships. The medieval system was based on what sociologists call thick relationships, multifaceted connections with people you know in different contexts. Our system is based on thin relationships, a series of brief transactional encounters. The value placed on reputation also meant that a craftsman's work was inextricably linked to his identity. The work was not just something he did, it was a reflection of who he was. To produce a flawed object was not just a business mistake, it was a moral failing. This is a powerful source of motivation. When your name is literally or figuratively stamped on your work, you are far more likely to care about its quality. The historian Stephen A. Epstein, in his book Wage and Labor in Late Medieval and Renaissance Florence, documents how guilds would publicly shame members for ethical breaches, understanding that social humiliation was a more potent deterrent than a simple fine. Today, many people work for large, faceless organizations. Their individual contribution is often invisible, and the final product is attributed to a corporate brand, not to them personally. This can lead to a sense of detachment and a lack of ownership. The guild system suggests that when we attach our personal name and honor to our work, the quality of that work inevitably rises. It asks us to consider what we are willing to stake our reputation on, and whether we are building a name that will be respected long after we are gone. If your personal name, not a corporate brand, was on every product or project you completed, what would you do differently? In an age of social media, has reputation become more important or just more fragile and easily manipulated? What would a modern economy look like if reputational capital was as important as financial capital? And what do we not understand about the psychological link between anonymity and unethical behavior? Number 8, how do you pass on a secret you can't write down? Imagine trying to learn how to ride a bicycle by reading a manual. The manual could describe the principles of balance, the mechanics of pedaling, and the technique for steering. You could memorize the entire book, but you still wouldn't know how to ride a bike. The only way to learn is to get on the bike and have someone hold the seat while you wobble and struggle until suddenly you get it. In that, it is tacit knowledge. It's the knowledge that we know but cannot easily tell. The entire medieval guild system was a magnificent engine for the transmission of tacit knowledge. The mysteries of a craft were the guild's most guarded secrets. These were not just trade secrets in the modern sense, like a secret recipe. They were a whole collection of techniques, judgments, and physical intuitions that were the key to producing high-quality work. How to strike a piece of hot iron with just the right force. How to feel the moment when a die has perfectly set in a bolt of cloth. How to hear the subtle change in sound that tells you a saw is sharp. This knowledge was not written down in textbooks. It was passed from master to apprentice through a long process of observation, imitation, and hands-on practice. The apprenticeship was the key. For 7 to 10 years, an apprentice lived with his master. He didn't just work in the shop, he ate at the master's table, and often slept under his roof. This total immersion created a rich learning environment. The apprentice learned by watching the master's hands, by listening to his comments, by feeling the materials, and by making countless mistakes. The master would correct him, not with a lecture, but with a physical demonstration. No, hold the chisel like this. Watch my wrist when I turn the lathe. This is what educational theorists like Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger call situated learning within a community of practice. Learning is not a separate activity that happens in a classroom. It is a social process of becoming a member of a community. This method of teaching is slow, inefficient, and deeply personal. It cannot be scaled up. You cannot teach tacit knowledge to a lecture hall of 500 students. It requires a close, long-term relationship between a teacher and a small number of students. Our modern educational system, with its emphasis on standardized tests and explicit codifiable knowledge, has largely abandoned this approach. We have become very good at teaching people what can be written down in a textbook, but we are less good at teaching the things that can only be learned through experience. This has created a skills gap in many modern trades. You can get a certificate in welding, but that doesn't make you a master welder. The real skill comes from years of practice, learning to read the puddle of molten metal and control it with subtle movements of your hand. Similarly, a person can graduate with a degree in computer science, but the art of writing clean, elegant, maintainable code is a craft that is often best learned by working alongside a senior developer, a modern form of apprenticeship. The guilds understood that the most valuable knowledge is embodied. It lives in the hands, the eyes, and the muscle memory of the practitioner. They build a system designed to protect and transmit this fragile, unwritten knowledge across generations. The secrecy of the guilds, the long apprenticeships, the oaths, and the rituals were all part of this. They were creating a container strong enough to hold a form of knowledge that could not be preserved in a book. Okay? They remind us that true expertise is more than just information. It's a way of being in the world, a deep, intuitive connection to a particular craft that can only be cultivated through years of dedicated practice under the guidance of a master. What essential knowledge in your own profession is impossible to write down in a training manual? If you had to teach your job to someone who could only learn by watching you, how would you do it? Are online courses and YouTube tutorials a viable substitute for in-person apprenticeship, or are they creating a generation of practitioners with dangerous gaps in their tacit knowledge? And what do we not yet know about how the brain acquires and stores the physical skills that we call craftsmanship? Number 7, do we work together or just side by side? Most of us work in organizations with other people. We have colleagues, we sit in the same office or join the same video calls, and we contribute to the same overall project. But are we truly working together, or are we just a collection of individuals working in proximity to each other, each focused on our own tasks and our own career path? The medieval guilds offer a different model of what it means to be part of a working community. For them, the guild was not just an organization, it was a brotherhood. The language they used reveals this. Every members were called brothers and sisters. The guild was often referred to as a fraternity or sodality. This was not just symbolic language. The guild was a primary source of social identity and mutual support, second only to the family and the church. The bonds between members were personal, deep, and intended to last a lifetime. This sense of community was fostered through a constant series of shared activities. As we've seen, they celebrated feast days and religious festivals together. They marched together in civic processions, they attended the funerals of fellow members, and the guild would provide financial support to the widow and orphans. The guild hall was the center of this social life. It was not just a place for meetings, it was a venue for banquets, weddings, and celebrations. It was a place where members could gather, share news, and resolve disputes. This constant social interaction built a high level of trust and solidarity. The guild also functioned as a comprehensive social safety net. In a world with no government welfare, no social security, and no health insurance, the guild was the primary source of support in times of crisis. The guild statutes from across Europe show that they provided sick pay for members who were unable to work. They gave loans to members who had fallen on hard times. They paid for the burial of poor members. Some even ran almshouses for elderly or infirm members who could no longer practice their trade. This was not charity, it was a system of mutual insurance. Every member contributed to the common fund, and every member had the right to draw from it in time of need. This created a powerful sense of security and interdependence. Your well-being was directly linked to the well-being of your fellow guild brothers. Compare this to the modern workplace. While some companies talk about being a family, the relationship is fundamentally contractual. If the company's financial situation changes, you can be laid off with little notice. Your health insurance is tied to your employment. There is a sense of pervasive insecurity. We are encouraged to see our colleagues as competitors for the next promotion. The system often pits individuals against each other rather than fostering a sense of collective responsibility. Unions are the modern institution that comes closest to the guild's role of collective support, but their influence has declined significantly in many industries. The guild's model of community was not perfect. It was often exclusive, barring women, Jews, and other outsiders from membership. The solidarity within the guild could also lead to intense hostility towards non-guild craftsmen or rival guilds. But the principle at its core is a powerful one that a working life is more stable, secure, and meaningful when it is embedded in a community of mutual obligation. They understood that an economy is not just a machine for producing goods and services, it is a network of human relationships. The health of those relationships determines the health of the system as a whole. What would your workplace be like if you and your colleagues were all responsible for each other's financial well-being in a crisis? Is it possible to build a true sense of brotherhood or sisterhood in a competitive, individualistic corporate culture? Has the decline of unions and other collective organizations left us more vulnerable and isolated than we realize? And what do we not understand about the human psychological need to belong to a professional tribe? Number 6 is a fair price, better than a free market. The law of supply and demand is the bedrock of modern economics. We believe that prices should be set by the free interplay of competition in the marketplace. The most efficient producer offering the lowest price will win, and this benefits the consumer. The idea of anyone deliberately interfering with this mechanism seems wrong, a distortion of the natural order. The medieval guilds were built on exactly this kind of interference. They did not believe in a free market. They believed in a just price. The concept of the just price, or justum pretium, was a central tenet of medieval economic thought, heavily influenced by theologians like Thomas Aquinas. It was the idea that every good had a correct ethical price. This price was not determined by whatever the seller could get away with charging. It was supposed to reflect the true cost of production, including the raw materials and the labor of the craftsman. Critically, the labor component was meant to be enough to allow the craftsman and his family to live a decent life appropriate to their station in society. The goal was not to maximize profit, but to maintain social order and ensure that everyone could make a reasonable living. The guilds were the primary enforcers of the just price. Their statutes often set specific prices for goods or, more commonly, set rules for how prices should be calculated. They would regulate the cost of raw materials and the wages paid to journeymen, which in turn controlled the final price of the product. The goal was to eliminate what they saw as destructive competition. They didn't want a master to drive his competitors out of business by slashing prices. This would lead to lower quality, lower wages, and instability for the whole community. They preferred a stable, predictable market where all members could prosper. This meant that innovation could be seen as a threat. A master who invented a new tool or process that allowed him to produce goods faster and cheaper would not be celebrated as an entrepreneur. He would be seen as an unfair competitor who was upsetting the balance of the community. Guilds often passed rules explicitly forbidding new technologies. For example, the records of the London guilds in the 14th and 15th centuries show numerous instances of them banning new types of looms or tools. From our perspective, this looks like a recipe for economic stagnation. However, from their perspective, they were protecting the livelihoods of their members and the quality of their products. They valued stability over growth and community welfare over individual enrichment. This is a trade-off that we are often unwilling to make. We have chosen a dynamic, innovative, and often brutal form of capitalism where companies and individuals are constantly at risk of being made obsolete by a new technology or a cheaper competitor. This system has produced incredible wealth and technological progress, but it has also created high levels of inequality and economic anxiety. The guild system of price controls was not sustainable in the long run. As markets expanded and became more global, it became impossible for local guilds to control prices. The rise of capitalist thinking, championed by figures like Adam Smith, provided the intellectual justification for dismantling the old system. But the guild's forgotten wisdom is that the price of a product is not just a number. It is a social and ethical statement. It reflects our values. A price can be exploitative or it can be fair. The guilds force us to ask whether the efficiency of the free market is always the most important goal, and whether there might be a place for a modern concept of the just price in our economy. What would happen if the price of every product had to be high enough to guarantee a living wage to every person who helps make it? Is the intense price competition of the global market a net benefit to humanity, or does it create a race to the bottom that harms workers and the environment? Could we ever agree on a just price for something like a smartphone or a cup of coffee? So what do we not yet understand about the relationship between pricing, value, and human well-being? Number 5, what if your job was also your family? For most of us, there is a clear line between our work life and our home life. We go to an office or log on to a computer, do our job, and then we go home to our real life with our family. The two worlds are separate, For a member of a medieval guild, this separation would have been meaningless. The workshop was almost always part of the master's house. Work, family, and community were a single, integrated whole. The typical guild workshop was a family enterprise. The master was the head of the household. His wife was often a crucial business partner, managing the accounts, dealing with customers, and sometimes even working in the trade herself. The journeymen and apprentices were not just employees, they were members of the household. They lived under the master's roof, ate at his table, and were subject to his authority in all matters. The master was legally and morally responsible for their well-being and their conduct. He was a boss, a teacher, and a father figure all at once. This fusion of work and home had profound implications. It meant that work was not an abstract activity performed in a sterile environment. It was part of the rhythm of daily life. The sounds and smells of the workshop filled the house. Children grew up watching their father at his craft, learning the tools and techniques from a young age. It was common for a son to follow his father into the trade, inheriting the workshop and continuing the family business. This created a powerful sense of lineage and continuity. The family name was synonymous with the family trade. The role of women in this system was complex and varied. Officially, most guilds were male-only institutions. However, the reality on the ground was often different. A master's wife was essential to the running of the business. And in many guilds, if a master died, his widow was allowed to take over the workshop and continue the trade, provided she hired a qualified journeyman to manage the technical work. These guild widows were often powerful and respected figures in the urban economy. There were also some guilds, particularly in textiles and silk production in cities like Paris and Cologne, that were composed entirely of women. But for the most part, the guild world was patriarchal, with power concentrated in the hands of the male masters. This domestic model of production had its dark side. Apprentices were at the mercy of their masters, and the relationship could be exploitative or abusive. The long hours and hard labor were relentless. There was no escape from work, no off switch. But it also offered a level of integration and coherence that is missing from many of our lives. The problem of work-life balance did not exist because work and life were not seen as opposing forces that needed to be balanced. There were two sides of the same coin. The Industrial Revolution shattered this integrated model. Work moved from the home workshop to the factory. The home became a private refuge from the harsh world of industrial labor. The separate spheres ideology developed, which assigned men to the public world of work and women to the private world of the home. We are still living with the consequences of this great separation. We struggle to connect our working selves with our private selves. The guilds, for all their limitations, show us a world where this division did not exist. They remind us that it's possible to organize our economic life around the household rather than the corporation. What have we lost by creating a sharp dividing line between our homes and our workplaces? Could the recent rise of remote work lead to a new integration of work and family life, or will it just blur the boundaries in a stressful way? Is the traditional family business a more humane and sustainable model than the shareholder-owned corporation? And what are the unknown psychological benefits of growing up in a home where productive, skillful work is a visible part of daily life? Number 4, who inspects the inspectors? Trust is the lubricant of any economy. When we buy a product or a service, we trust that it will be what it claims to be. Today, that trust is often underwritten by a complex system of government regulation, independent auditors, and corporate brands. But what if the system was simpler? What if trust was based on the simple fact that the people checking the quality were the most respected experts in the field, and their own reputations were on the line? This was the essence of the guild system of quality control. As mentioned before, guilds were obsessed with maintaining the quality of their products. This was not just about pride, it was about economic survival. The collective reputation of the guild was paramount. To protect this reputation, the guilds developed a rigorous system of internal inspection. At the heart of this system were the guild's own masters. Each year, the guild would elect or appoint several of its most senior and respected masters to serve as inspectors. They went by various titles, such as wardens, echevins. These were not outside bureaucrats or professional auditors. They were practitioners of the craft at the highest level. They knew every trick, every shortcut, and every possible way to cheat. It was impossible to pull the wool over their eyes. They had the legal authority, granted by the town government, to enter any workshop of a guild member at any time, without warning. Their inspection was thorough. They would examine the raw materials to ensure they were of the proper quality. They would check the tools to see if they were up to standard. A weaver's loom, for example, had to be of a certain width. Finally, they would inspect the finished or in-process goods. If they found any violation of the guild's statutes, the consequences were swift. Substandard goods were confiscated and often publicly destroyed. The offending craftsman was fined. For repeated or serious offenses, a master could be suspended or even expelled from the guild, which meant he could no longer legally practice his trade in that town. The records of the Worshipful Company of Pewters in London, for instance, are filled with detailed accounts of such inspections and the fines levied. This system raises the timeless question: quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who guards the guards? What was to stop the inspectors themselves from being corrupt, from accepting bribes, or from using their power to harass their personal rivals? There were several checks on their power. First, they were elected by their peers and served for a limited term, usually a year. A master who abused his power would not be re-elected. Second, their work was done in the open, and their decisions could often be appealed to the guild's governing council or even the town government. Third, and most importantly, their own reputation was on the line. An inspector who was seen as unfair or corrupt would lose the respect of his fellow masters, the most valuable thing he possessed. This system of peer review-based quality control is remarkably effective. It is still used today in academia, where scientific papers are peer-reviewed by other experts in the field before they can be published. The guilds applied this principle to the entire economy. They believed that the only people truly qualified to judge the quality of a craftsman's work were other craftsmen. This system was not perfect. It could be subject to cronyism and could be used to stifle competition. But it was built on a powerful insight that accountability is strongest when it is enforced by a community of knowledgeable peers who all have a stake in maintaining the group's reputation. Could a system of peer-based inspection work in modern industries like software development or financial services? What is more effective at ensuring quality, a government regulator with a rule book or a senior practitioner with a lifetime of experience? When experts are called upon to regulate their own industry, at what point does it become a case of the fox guarding the henhouse? And what do we not yet understand about the power of reputation as an enforcement mechanism in a high-trust community? Number 3, can you prove your worth with one project? How do you get a good job today? You submit a resume. It's a document that lists your past jobs, your education, your skills. It's a summary, an abstraction of your abilities. You might also submit a portfolio of past work. But ultimately, the hiring manager is taking a leap of faith. They are trusting that your past performance is a good indicator of your future performance. The guilds had a more direct and demanding system. To become a master, you couldn't just talk about your skills. You had to prove them in a single high-stakes test, the creation of a masterpiece. The masterpiece, or chef d'oeuvre in French, was the final examination for a journeyman who wanted to become a master and open his own shop. After years of apprenticeship and several more years of traveling and working for other masters, a journeyman would petition the guild for mastership. The guild masters would then assign him a specific project. This was not a project of his own choosing. It was a set piece designed to test the full range of his skills. For a cabinet maker, it might be a complex inlaid chest with multiple types of wood and joinery. For a locksmith, it could be a highly intricate lock with a unique key. For a painter, it might be a religious altarpiece with multiple figures. The specifications were often incredibly detailed. The journeyman had to produce this work on his own, often in a locked room or with regular inspections to ensure he was not getting help. He had to pay for the raw materials himself, which was a significant financial hurdle. This could take months or even over a year. When the piece was finished, it was presented to the assembled masters of the guild for judgment. They would examine it with a critical eye, looking for the slightest flaw in technique or execution. Their decision was final. If the piece was accepted, the journeyman paid a hefty fee, was sworn in as a master, and was now a full member of the guild with the right to open a shop and train his own apprentices. If the piece was rejected, his hopes were dashed. He might be allowed to try again later, but the public failure was a significant blow to his finances and his reputation. The masterpiece was more than just a technical test. It was a test of character. It required patience, planning, resource management, and the ability to perform under immense pressure. It was a demonstration that the journeyman had not just the skill, but also the maturity and financial stability to run his own business. It was a rite of passage, a transformative ordeal that separated the competent from the truly masterful. The physical masterpiece itself often became a treasured possession of the guild, displayed in the guild hall as an example for future generations. We have no modern equivalent to the masterpiece. The closest might be the doctoral dissertation for a PhD candidate or the final project at an architecture school. But in most professions, we have replaced this kind of holistic, performance-based assessment with a series of credentials, certificates, and interviews. We have come to trust the proxy, the resume, more than the proof, the work. The guild's wisdom is that the best way to know if someone can do a job is to watch them do it. The masterpiece was a costly, time-consuming, and stressful way to do this. But it was also incredibly effective. It ensured that the title of master was not given lightly. It meant that a customer who walked into the shop of a guild master could be confident that they were dealing with a craftsman of proven, verified ability. It was the ultimate guarantee of quality, a standard against which all other work was measured. What if the only way to get a promotion was to complete a single, difficult project that demonstrated your mastery of the next level of skills? How would our hiring practices change if we replaced resumes and interviews with a standardized masterpiece test for each profession? Is it fair to judge a person's entire career potential on a single high-stakes performance? And what have we lost by moving from a system that evaluates what people can do to one that evaluates what they have done? Number 2, why do we stop wandering for work? Many young people today are encouraged to study abroad for a semester or take a gap year to travel after graduation. We see this as a way to broaden their horizons and gain life experience. After that, the goal is usually to find a stable job and settle down. In the medieval guild system, this period of wandering was not a recreational break from a career, it was a mandatory part of it. This was the life of the journeyman. After completing his apprenticeship, typically around the age of 19 or 20, a young craftsman was not yet a master. He was a journeyman, a term that comes from the French journée, meaning a day's work. He was now free from his master and could work for wages, but in many guilds, especially in Germany where the tradition was strongest, he was required to travel for a set period, often 2 to 5 years. This period of mandatory travel was called the Wanderjahre. The journeyman would pack a small bag with his tools and a change of clothes and set off on the road. He would walk from town to town, seeking work with masters in his trade. This was not a random or haphazard journey. There was a well-established network of guild-run inns and hostels where a traveling journeyman could get a cheap meal and a place to sleep. He would present his credentials to the local guild, and if there was work available, he would be placed with a master for a few weeks or months. When the work was done, or when he got restless, he would move on to the next town. This system served several crucial functions. First, it was an advanced form of education. By working with different masters in different cities, a journeyman was exposed to a wide range of techniques, styles, and tools. He learned the regional specialties of his craft. A cabinet maker from Nuremberg might learn new joinery techniques in Flanders and different finishing methods in France. This cross-pollination of ideas was a powerful engine of innovation, spreading best practices across Europe. It prevented crafts from becoming stagnant and isolated. Second, it served as a mechanism for balancing the labor market. If there was a surplus of carpenters in one town and a shortage in another, the journeyman system helped to smooth out these imbalances. It was a flexible, mobile workforce that could go where the work was. Third, it was a profound life experience. The journeyman learned to be self-reliant, adaptable, and resourceful. He saw the world beyond his hometown and learned to deal with different people and customs. The Wanderjahre was a period of personal growth, a rite of passage from adolescence to adulthood. And some traditions of the journeyman, like their distinctive clothing and secret rituals, survive in parts of Europe to this day. Today, we have largely lost this tradition of professional wandering. We might move for a specific job or for college, but the idea of a few years of mandatory, semi-nomadic work seems completely alien. The gig economy has created a class of mobile, flexible workers, but they often lack the support system, the educational focus, and the sense of professional identity that the journeyman had. The journeyman was not just a freelancer, he was a member of a respected craft, on a well-defined path towards mastery. The wisdom of the Wanderjahre is that deep expertise is not built by staying in one place. It is built by exposing oneself to a variety of perspectives and challenges. It's the idea that the best way to become a master of your craft is to first become a student of the world. It challenges our modern emphasis on specialization and stability, suggesting that a period of structured wandering might be a valuable part of any career. What if every professional, from doctors to software engineers, was required to spend 2 years working in different regions or countries before they could be fully licensed? How would this change their skills and their perspective? Is the modern digital nomad a new kind of journeyman, or are they missing the crucial elements of mentorship and community? Has our focus on a stable, linear career path made us less resilient and adaptable? And what do we not understand about the link between travel, learning, and the development of genuine expertise? Number one, what if learning took a decade? We live in an age of instant gratification, and our approach to education reflects this. We are drawn to the weekend workshop, the 12-week coding bootcamp, the online course that promises to teach us a new skill in a few hours. We want to learn quickly and efficiently to get the credential and move on to the next thing. The foundation of the entire guild system was built on the opposite premise that true deep learning is slow, difficult, and takes a very long time. This was the purpose of the apprenticeship. Apprenticeship was the gateway to a craft. It was a formal, contractual relationship that typically began when a boy was between 10 and 14 years old. His parents would pay a fee to a master craftsman, and in return, the master agreed to house, feed, and clothe the boy, and to teach him the art and mystery of his trade. The contract or indenture was legally binding and would last for a fixed term, usually between 7 and 10 years. For that entire period, the apprentice was legally bound to his master. He was part student, part employee, and part adopted son. The education was not academic. It was practical, immersive, and often grueling. An apprentice's first years were spent on menial tasks, sweeping the workshop, running errands, preparing raw materials, and sharpening tools. This was not just drudgery, it was the beginning of his education. By handling the materials every day, he began to develop a feel for them. By watching the master and journeyman at work, he absorbed the rhythms and processes of the craft. He learned the names of the tools and the culture of the workshop. Only after years of this basic work would he be allowed to perform simple tasks on the product itself. The learning process was one of gradual, supervised participation. He would learn by doing, making countless mistakes along the way. The master's role was to guide and correct him, providing constant feedback. This is a model that educational psychologists now call cognitive apprenticeship. It makes the invisible thinking processes of an expert visible to the learner. The master would often think aloud, explaining why he was choosing a particular tool or making a certain cut. This long, slow process was designed to build more than just technical skill. It was designed to build character. The apprentice learned discipline, patience, and respect for the craft. He learned the importance of quality and the shame of shoddy work. He was not just learning a set of techniques, he was being socialized into a professional identity. By the time he completed his 7 or 10 years, he was not just a competent craftsman, he was a member of the guild community with a deep understanding of its norms and values. Our modern education system, with its focus on classroom learning and standardized tests, often fails to provide this kind of deep, integrated learning. We separate theory from practice and learning from working. The result is that many graduates enter the workforce with a great deal of theoretical knowledge but little practical skill or understanding of the culture of their chosen profession. Internships are a pale imitation of the immersive experience of a true apprenticeship. The guild's wisdom is that there are no shortcuts to mastery. Deep skill and understanding are not things that can be hacked or acquired in a weekend seminar. They are the product of thousands of hours of deliberate practice in a rich social context under the guidance of a mentor. It's a model that values depth over breadth and patience over speed. It challenges us to reconsider our obsession with educational efficiency and to ask whether, in our haste to learn everything, we have forgotten how to learn anything well. If you had to spend 7 years as an apprentice before you could practice your current profession, how would that change who enters the field and how they perform? Is the high cost and time commitment of a traditional college education a modern form of apprenticeship or something else entirely? Could the apprenticeship model be revived on a large scale to address modern skills gaps in fields from elder care to cybersecurity? And what is the ultimate unquantifiable cost to a society that no longer values the slow cultivation of deep practical wisdom?